welcome to this week's episode of Live Without Training Wheels. I am so glad that you could be here to join me. I am also thrilled to be joined by my friend, Ann Carrico, who is a blogger at Annie and Everything. And she is here tonight to talk to us specifically about homeschooling high school. And I have to admit, selfishly speaking, I'm really looking forward to this because I have some specific questions that I'd like to ask Ann, and I'm looking for her feedback and her encouragement. She has written a book, which we will tell you a little bit about later, but I've read it and it was so helpful. So I'm kind of pinching myself at the opportunity to have a live in-person conversation. Well, not in person, but as in person as you can get when you live in two different states, with her about this experience. And before we jump into that, I just want to take a minute to do a couple of housekeeping details so that you will be comfortable here and ready to enjoy your experience. If you are watching us from YouTube or Facebook, you're welcome to keep watching there. But I do just want to let you know that since Ann and I are live streaming from inside Crowdcast, that's where we are able to see comments and answer questions. So if you hear us referencing comments that are left or answering questions, that's here inside Crowdcast. If you want to join us inside Crowdcast, we'd love to have you. You just need to look in the video description for a link to hop on over to the Crowdcast event. Click the green button, and that will let you right into the event where we are. And if you are watching on Facebook and you leave comments, then no trouble. I'll hop over there after the video is over and we can interact there on that video inside Facebook. Now, if you're watching inside Crowdcast, you're going to get the best engagement on a desktop or laptop because, thumb typing. But if you're on a mobile phone, that's totally fine. You just need to flip it into landscape mode and then click the little square in the top right corner to go to full screen view. And then if you tap show chat, then you'll still be able to view the chat window and see all that as it's happening. A couple things you'll want to notice right down here underneath our faces, there are some buttons. One is the poll button. So if you want to click on polls, and we would be curious to know where you are in this whole homeschooling high school status. So are you considering it like down the road? Is it happening in the next year or two? Are you homeschooling high school now? And if so, we would love to have your input and anything that you've learned along the way. And then right next to the poll, you'll see a button called Ask a Question. And we already have a couple of questions lined up here. So once we are done talking, once Ann and I are done chatting about the things that we've got to share with you tonight, we'll hop over to the Q&A section of the broadcast. And what we'll do is we will just start at the top and we'll answer as many questions as we have time for. Sometimes I can get to all the questions that have been asked in an episode, and sometimes we run out of time. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go in there and vote any questions that seem particularly interesting or relevant to you, upvote them, because that will raise them up to the top of the list. And then we'll be sure to start with the ones that seem like they'd be the most helpful or the most relevant to the largest number of people. Okay, so before we get started, I would love it, Ann, if you could just tell us a little bit about you, your family. How did you get into this whole writing about homeschooling high school? Give us some background details.
Sure. Well, I have 5 kids. We homeschooled them from the beginning. So my oldest is now going to be 25 pretty quick. And so since before she started kindergarten, we started homeschooling. Now 4 of them have graduated. I've got 1 left. She's a sophomore in high school. My husband is a husband. I have one and he is a pilot. He's gone a lot of the time. So it's me and the kids a lot of the time, but that actually is one of the reasons why we homeschooled, is because then we could work around his schedule.
Oh,
and
right.
The kids could see him. And so when he's home, we're doing things with him. And then when he's gone, we're buckling more down on school. So yeah, as far as helping people with homeschooling high school, I kind of fell into it. I knew that I had done it. And when I started blogging, that was one of the topics on my blog, but I didn't realize how much of a need there is out there until I started my Facebook group, and it grew very quickly. And I realized there's a huge need out there, that there's a lot of misconceptions out there. There's a lot of fears out there. There's a lot of things that people would really be helped to know. And so I began to focus more and more on that topic. And I love it because I love homeschooling. I love talking about homeschooling. And so it's been a great, really fun time for me. And people do seem to be relieved when they hear the type of things I have to say. So I hopefully we can help some people in that way today.
Absolutely. Selfishly, I'm hoping that I'm going to get some encouragement. I was telling Anne before we started that my oldest has crested the hill of 8th grade and is heading down the leeward side. So we are, looking right at 9th grade coming up on us. And he's expressed an interest in some classes outside the house. And it kind of feels like new territory for me. So let's just talk about, now these are the 3 things that, here I sit as kind of your ideal audience, this mom who's about to take on this homeschooling high school journey. And so I listed the 3 things that I was feeling particularly nervous about. And so I'm going to ask Anne to tell us a little bit more about those, but this is by no means just all about Lina. So if you have other things that you would like to hear more about, you can absolutely put them over in the comments or, drop your questions in the ask a question box. So the first thing, Anne, that makes me nervous is teaching subjects at a high school level. Like it's a great, I've been totally capable of managing reading picture books about what things float and desert animals and reading through Story of the World. Feeling a little nervous about delivering high school level content.
Right. And that is a very common fear. I mean, chemistry, right? Who wants to attempt to teach that? The great thing is that at that level, there are so many more resources, even now, than there used to be when I started homeschooling high school with my oldest. There are so many online classes. There are so many more homeschool curriculums available. There are community college classes. If you want to think about sending your kid to the community college and getting dual enrollment, you can get a tutor. There's lots of ways to do it outside the family where you can get the content for those courses into your kid's head, or at least, get him through the course. But the way we did it in my house, because we live extremely rurally, so it was a lot of gas, a lot of time to try to get anybody anywhere. And online classes, they've actually come down quite a bit in price, but they used to be a lot more expensive. So I started fostering something really early in our homeschool career that turned out to be one of the best things for high school. And that was, I started fostering my kids teaching themselves. So by the time all of them have gotten to high school, they've been able to read a textbook, answer some questions, check their work, study for tests, take the tests. So chemistry in particular, 4 of my kids have taught themselves chemistry.
Wow.
Now I'm there for a resource. If they have a question, I'm there to sit down and we'll look through the book together to try to find the answer, or we'll go Google together to try to find the answer if they're just completely stuck. But it's been a wonderful experience to watch them learn how to learn. And it's something that can be started at any age. So I was kind of forced to start early because I had so many kids. I know you can relate to trying to juggle that many kids. And so I had 5 kids in 8 years. So when the oldest was 8 years old, then I also had a 6-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and an infant that I was nursing. And so the 8-year-old was in, 2nd or 3rd grade. And yet I was still trying to teach the 6 and the 5 to read, right? And the 3-year-old was my son, and he was running around like crazy. And then I'm nursing the infant. So I just didn't have time for everybody. And so I started to tell the 8-year-old, hey, take a look at this math page and see if you can figure it out and see how you do. And she did. And so over time, gradually, we just added more and more to her plate. And then as the younger ones came up, I realized, hey, this is actually a pretty decent thing, and it's working out really well. And it gives me more time to work with everybody where they need to be worked with. And yet I'm not stuck at the table the entire day. But again, it can be started at any age. So even if your kid is just entering high school or about to enter high school, I would highly suggest that you start to have them work on doing things by themselves. I actually have a couple blog posts about that, and it's something that I'm writing about in my new book that will be coming out hopefully before the end of the spring. And so there's kind of a process that you can go through to make that happen, but it's not rocket science. So, and you know your kids, so you could probably figure out for yourself, okay, let me just take my hands off a little bit more and a little bit more. Let me help them, you know, initially first, and then, okay, no, you need to try this problem all by yourself, and I'm walking away, you know, however it works with your kid and your kind of style. But we don't have to teach our kids every single course in high school. In fact, and that by the time they're juniors, completely themselves. That's what they're going to teach. The professor's not going to hold their hand. The professor's not going to go over the stuff more than once. Most of the time they listen to the lecture, they take the notes, they go home, and then they have to open the textbook, right? And read it and figure it out for themselves and do the problems. So that's my biggest advice about how to get through those harder, higher level classes is, Mom, don't think that you have to do it. Let the kid do it. And on those ones that you just are intimidated even by letting the kid do it, then
so, and as I'm listening to you talk about this, I'm thinking, like, first of all, yes, that is brilliant advice. And it's encouraging to think about moving along those lines. And I'm also thinking, so once again, I'm reminded of how homeschooling is not really this completely separate animal from the rest of parenting. Like what you're talking about applies to all of the rest of parenting life too, right? We're always going to be gradually saying, why don't you see if you can do that for yourself? So it's not like, oh no, we have to do this weird thing of coaching them on independence just because we homeschool. Well, you know, that's part of all kinds of areas of parenting too. So it's always helpful to me to be reminded that, like, you know, this is just parenting in depth. Okay. So beyond, you know, how do I deliver, how do I give them that high school content? Then another question I have is, how do I know what qualifies as high school level work? So, you know, it's one thing if you have, say, like, you know, I have this science textbook and it comes with tests and they do the worksheets and they do the test and whatever. But what if I'm doing something like, okay, my son is a self-taught artist and he's constantly doing art, and maybe that could be an elective, but like, how much art does he need to do? And how, you know, like, how do I, if it's something we're doing a little more on our own, how do I measure what is a high school credit?
Right. I'll be honest with you. And first of all, I probably should have started with this from the very beginning. I don't pretend to know everything. I don't pretend to have experience in everything. We did high school our way, and there's just so many different ways to do it, right? But I can, after having graduated 4, I have a certain amount of experience that I can speak from. So there are going to be some times probably tonight where I have to say, I don't know. This is verging on one of those. I have some ideas, and I've learned a lot in my Facebook group from other moms, of course. You're right. Curriculum is one way that we can say, okay, Algebra 1, we know is a high school level course. If they're taking Algebra 1, it's high school level. It's easy. It's a no-brainer. But those other ones where you're trying to either create some credits out of what they've spent their time on, or you're trying to create a course. A lot of moms like to do that. I always completely shied away from it. That's not my thing at all. Too much work. But I'd rather have it all prepared for me. But a lot of moms do like to do that. So then what is high school level work? And to be honest with you, there's no one right answer for that. When you think about, and this is what we tend to do, we tend to compare ourselves to the public school system. And one of the things that this is one area where we can look at the public school system and say, okay, there are kids of all levels going through high school. There are kids of all academic levels, I should say, going through high school. There are the upper level kids, the ones that are definitely college bound, you know, and interestingly enough, at high school, they get really grouped together. So the college bound kids are grouped together. Then you've got your more kind of average kids that are grouped together. And then you have your kids who are maybe a couple grade levels behind, and they're still going through high school, and they're still getting college or high school credit for going through high school. And they're still going to graduate, even if they don't finish the courses that the college bound or anybody else finishes, they still are getting high school credit. So a lot of it depends on the kid. And it's not something that we have to feel like, oh, well, it needs to be, you know, there needs to be this much homework, or it needs to be that they're learning content that is this deep. A lot of it depends on the kid and what they're capable of. And a lot of it depends too on what the mom feels comfortable with. It's interesting that when you look at homeschool laws, they don't really talk about doing stuff on grade level, do they? They just talk about, okay, you need to teach them history, or they need to have so many credits of history. A lot of the state homeschool laws don't even specify that far as how many credits of history. They just say, okay, maybe they need to have some history. They don't really talk about what level of history it is. So it's kind of like it's not a conscience thing, but just kind of let what you want to do, what you feel comfortable with, what your conscience feels comfortable giving credit for, be your guide. And it depends on your kid and you. Now, as far as credits are concerned, a certain number of hours is considered to be a credit. And for art, for example, that could strictly be something that you do as you count his hours and say, okay, he spent this many hours, so that's worth this many credits. And then you can decide for yourself if you want to try to grade that on an A, B, C, D level, or if you just want to give it a pass-fail. Either way is fine. So there's no one right answer to that question. We all kind of have a general idea. And if your kid is capable of fulfilling that idea, then go for it. And if not, then adapt your expectations, but realize that in the public school, kids of all levels who are doing all types of work are still going to graduate.
Yeah, that is very helpful. Thank you. Yeah. One of the things that had kind of stumped me was the idea of using hours where, like, so for example, my son is really quick with his math, and I mean, that's just a subject that he's good at. And so he's going to finish that a lot more quickly, and so I thought, well, the number of hours you spend on something isn't necessarily, equivalent to how well you've comprehended it, depending on your, but I like that idea of just kind of looking at it from a variety of different perspectives and deciding what, in your mind is an equivalent.
I'm pretty black and white. My conscience feels best when I've said, okay, I know they've completed 60 hours of time playing softball, for instance. That's what my daughter does. And so for me to give her a half a credit of PE, I want to see her there for at least at practice or at games for at least 60 hours. That's what I feel comfortable with. And it has nothing to do with ability. It's just softball, and she's there,
She's not
like
achieving
PE.
a certain level of
you get the credit, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Now, when you're talking about the academic subjects, then it does become a little bit more difficult to discern. And you're right. One kid may take an hour to read a book that another kid takes 3 hours. So then academic subjects does kind of become more about the type of book they're reading, the type of assignments they're doing. Are they expected to do, a 5-page paper versus a 5-paragraph essay? How many of each? Are they taking notes? Are they doing quizzes? Are they discussing? What level are they discussing at? All of those things.
And then it's sort of a lot fuzzier.
Yeah, it is. And so I personally shied away from any type of creating my own stuff. That's why I went for the stuff that was already created. And that's just what I felt comfortable with. But every mom is different, and it's all fine.
So I guess that kind of feeds into my next question, which is, even if I decide that, okay, I'm comfortable with, they complete this thing, or they do this number of hours or something, and that's going to, qualify as a high school credit. And I'm not just, trying to twist the numbers or something. I really think that's a high school credit. So that's one thing. But then the next question is, I actually want my children to not just like look good on paper, but to actually be prepared for whatever's next, whether that be, like just going out into the working world, or they need to be ready for college. So that's kind of like the next layer to that question. So how do I know if I've done good by them in that respect?
Yes. Well, I would say independent learning is another way to prepare them for the next step, whether it be college or the workplace or the military or wherever they're going to go next. If they know how to learn, then they can learn wherever they are. and that's going to help them advance wherever they are. So that's one of the big things I still want to just put that out there. Another thing, and this is open for debate amongst homeschoolers and high schoolers, is the whole idea of grades, right? There's the idea of giving grades. People go both sides on that. And then there's the idea of teaching to mastery, if you will. A lot of people believe that their kid's going to take the material enough times until they get the A. And so as long as they are repeating that material, if they don't do well the first time, then they're going to do it again and do it again until they get that A. And that's what a lot of people believe. And there's some merit in that. I disagree with that. And that's my main reason is we're preparing them for the adult world. We're preparing them for college where that doesn't happen, because there's a lot of things that are being lost when you are teaching to mastery or having them repeat over and over again until they get an A. And there's that sense of a deadline that gets lost. We've got all sorts of deadlines in the real world, and we don't get a chance to do over. And I think it's good for kids to learn how to work towards a deadline. I also think it's good for kids to experience a bad grade and learn how to recover from it. Then they know they have to work harder if they want to pull their grade back up. And I think that's also a good life lesson to learn. And there's a few other ways to look at that. But that is one thing that I do suggest to prepare them for the future is hold them accountable for the grade that they get. And another thing would be to hold them accountable for, how did I want to put that? Their time. I guess that's how I wanted to put that. Teach them, again, time management. That's another part of aspect of independent learning that helps prepare them for later. I actually wrote a blog post about how do you know for sure if your kids are going to be prepared for college. And those were 3 of the big things, but I feel like there were 2 more, but I don't remember what they were at the top of my head right now. Golly. I wish I could remember.
Well, I tell you what, let's do,
Ann.
Why don't you, you can look it up, and then afterwards, after the show, I'll grab that link from you and I'll add it into the show notes of this video. So if folks are watching it on the replay, then they can even click over and see that.
Yeah, that was silly.
No, that's
Sorry,
fine. So as you're talking, here's something I'm thinking of. So you were talking about, our kids getting grades and, needing to kind of learn how to process that, especially if they don't get a good grade, or, kind of accepting the consequences of not, managing their time well or something like that. And as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, wow, that's going to be kind of a learning curve for me too. Like, we haven't done grades up until this point. Well, I guess their math programs have grades with them, but other than that, we haven't graded their history or science or whatever. And, I'm going to need to think about how to process, like, okay, my kid goes out into the quote unquote real world of the homeschool co-op and gets, his first assignments, and maybe he's going to drop some balls, and maybe he's going to get some bad grades. And I'm just being totally honest. I'm having some mom anxiety of like, oh my goodness, it's a referendum on the first 13 years of my parenting. And does any of that sound familiar?
Yes. Yes. Oh my goodness. The teen years are when you learn to get over yourself as a parent. I got to be honest, because they just are going to come across and in ways that you never anticipated sometimes. And you're going to feel like, did I teach them anything? Did anything as far as politeness and manners and even doing chores? Did any of that sink in that they did so faithfully when they were kids, but now they're teenagers and it seems to all go out the window, and you just have to get over yourself. You just do. And you will. And we all do. We're so certain we're such good parents. And then our kids hit the teen years and then we're like, okay, no, I guess I'm pretty ordinary after all.
Okay. Yeah.
That's okay. It's actually a good place to be. But I found the blog post, and I can't believe I didn't remember one of these, but I'm going to give you the other one first, which was I also firmly believe in a strong language arts foundation, because then they're going to be able to read whatever comes their way, and they're going to be able to communicate. And so that's going to you can learn anything with a language arts foundation. Math and science are great. Don't get me wrong, but you can learn math and science with a language arts foundation. Whereas if you have a great math foundation, that doesn't necessarily translate everywhere, right? So if you're going to focus on something, focus on the language arts. But the big, big thing, and this is like so huge, I can't even believe I didn't remember this. Do your research. That's how you know when you've prepared them for college. And this is like one of my big, big things that I tell people all the time is find out what the colleges want.
Yes.
That's how you know when you've got them ready for college or when you're preparing them correctly for college. So go to the college websites, look up the admissions requirements, look at exactly what course this college and that college and another college require. They're going to require so many credits of math. They're going to require so many credits of language arts. They're going to require so many credits of history. You'll be surprised when you look these things up, actually how minimal their requirements are. It leaves us a lot of freedom. But if you've sampled several colleges, then you can see a general pattern, and then you can make sure your kid takes those courses in high school, and then you'll know they're ready. You'll know they'll have a good chance of getting in because you did your groundwork research. You found out what was required, and you made sure.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because that was one of the things you talked about in your book, and that walking through that activity as I read your book was like, oh. Okay. I mean, it's still a big job, but it's like, it doesn't seem so like just nebulous and like scary out there. It's more like, oh, I see. It's like this and this, and that seems like reasonable. And
when you know what you need to do, you can make a plan to get there. But when you have no clue what it is, you're like, well, I don't even know where to start. But yeah, it takes a whole lot of the burden off.
I was like
so that's
honors classes, AP credits, blah, blah, blah person. And so that's my idea of what high school has to be like. So
I know, right? But it doesn't.
So
yeah. Doesn't have to be like we did. And they don't learn like we did. And there's so many things that we can change up. But we do have these ideas in our head, and we think we have to live up to them.
High school, like you have to take 8 classes a day. That was my memory of like what you do when you're in high school. And when I looked at what was required, like, what a college would expect you to have coming in, it was like, well, like the 4 basics and then some electives, but it's not really like, I don't see us needing to do 8 subjects every day.
No. And you don't even need to do all like the core credits. You don't need to do them every year. So a lot of colleges only ask for 3 credits of math. So, and if you get, sometimes you can get a couple of, I was going to say a couple of those, but it makes it sound like a couple of math credits. I meant a couple of core credits done in, say, 8th grade, right? So let's say you take a math credit in 8th grade. If you are taking Algebra 1 in 8th grade, then 2 more math credits. So you don't even have to take math junior and senior year, if that's the way that works out. Or if you start Algebra 1 in 9th grade, then you wouldn't have to take math in senior year at all. You don't have to take core classes, all of them every year. Now, language arts, yes, most colleges are going to require 4 credits of language arts. But the others, it just depends, and you don't have to weigh yourself down with
freshman year of college, I was in like kind of like a history 101 kind of class, and we were assigned a paper. I think it was something about the Salem witch trials, and we even had like 1 or 2 books that we were required to read. So it wasn't even like go find some things and do research. It was like read these things, and then you need to write a paper about it. And multiple times I showed up for class, and the professor was saying, okay, so I want you to raise your hand and tell me a quote that you found in the book that was relevant to this topic, or, tell me how would you go about like, making a paragraph out of this information. And I went to him later and I was like, like this was on the syllabus. So I was kind of doing this as my homework, but I'm not sure, like, why are we doing that in class? And he said, well, the college told me that most incoming freshmen don't know how to write papers. So they wanted us to use our freshman history class to, teach everybody how to write papers. And at the time I was a little frustrated, but looking back, I mean, I'm not saying like, okay, woohoo, let's all lower the standards because they don't expect it anyway. But anyway, it just makes me a little comforted to know that there's some buffer. There's a little bit of, like you were saying, like lots of people graduate high school with a wide variety of actual, ability levels or whatever. So Not saying I'm just going to shoot for the bottom, but
Mm-hmm.
it just provides a little mental, yeah.
No, I mean, and that is true. At college, they know that freshmen are coming in and need some help. And they do help as in many ways that they can. And that's actually the second part of that blog post is, listen, do these things, but realize that colleges are going to help your kid too in this way.
Yeah.
So
that's encouraging. That's encouraging. All right. So before we hop over to the Q&A, I feel like you might have already answered this question. So if you just need to say like, go back and listen to what I said before, that's fine. But so the last thing I was going to ask was like, do you have one or two gems of what, is really good for us to be doing now to prepare for homeschooling high school? So I feel like, wow, the working towards independence and the doing some actual research to sort of lower the panic level of mom. Anything else you want to expand on? Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Actually, no, those are the two biggies. Do the research, look at the colleges. Don't look at public school requirements for high school. Just don't waste your time. They're there. You can find them, but they're not something that you need to follow. And usually they are just extremely intimidating and lead to frustration. There is no point. A lot of people talk about using them as a guide, but you don't have to. The guide that you want to use is what the colleges require. Use that as your guide.
High schools and colleges are kind of, they're like pitching to a different goal. Like high schools want to turn out a lot of super achieving kids who get into really high level colleges because that's what makes them look good, right? It's like, X percentage of our students got into Ivy League schools and X percentage of our students, whatever. So they want all of their students to achieve at the highest level. But then you flip it around, look at going into college. They want to matriculate freshmen, right? And I'm not saying that there are no requirements, but they're not saying like, if you don't have the highest credentials, don't bother applying. So it was really helpful to me. Yeah, right.
Well, some are, but not the ones
or
that
just
most
even
people
if
are
you're
gonna be
using
looking
that
for.
as a measure of like what actually is a high school education, then that what colleges would accept might be a more realistic thing than what public high schools are pushing for you to do.
Yes. And then independent learning, time management, and a caveat, of course, of all of this is know your state homeschool law. Know your state homeschool law. There's just a couple of them. I shouldn't say a couple, a few, a kind of small number. I don't know the exact number that have specific requirements for graduation. Definitely do your research and find out if yours is one of them. But again, it's a small number. So most of them don't have that kind of requirement. It's mostly just a continuation of whatever the elementary, whatever you've been doing is kind of, then you adapt that to high school, but they don't have specific requirements. So,
I think in our state, the only thing that might be a little different in high school is just that, if you're providing end of the year results for your schooling with testing, then like when you start taking PSATs and SATs, they could count as your testing, but that's not really high school specific. That's more just kind of with the testing piece. So yeah, I think in our state, it's like you said, there's not like this big flip of the script when you get to high school. Great. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and start getting into our questions here. And what I'm going to do before I do that though, is I'm going to pop up this little button at the bottom, a little green button below me, because even as you've heard Anne talk tonight, and she's mentioned that, I read a post about this, her site really is a wealth of resources. And I mean, I'm saying this as like somebody who has personally sought out these resources for help, for information, for like restoring sanity kind of thing. So, I'm going to put that there. So if you want to click over and learn more about Annie and everything and what she has to offer on that site, you can do that. And then if you're watching this from my blog page, if you look below the show notes, there's a link there to information about her book. If you're interested, I highly recommend it. As I said, I've personally read it, found it very helpful. It's very, logical, step-by-step, well-ordered. There you go. Cure the Fear of Homeschooling High School. Yeah. How to make sure you're not missing anything, right? Because that's the fear, is like summed up in a nutshell. I'm going to miss things.
Yes.
So, okay, let's get into some of our questions. So, let's see. So this is Jen's question. I think actually you just touched on this already. What states do the leaders of this discussion have experience with? What states are viewers in? I know we don't all want to give away our location, but there's a huge difference in state to state requirements for homeschooling, from practically no regulations and the submission of plans and evaluations. So Anna's in Missouri, I'm in Virginia, but I think the topic of what we're talking about here tonight is more just in terms of, how do you prepare for homeschooling high school? And like Ann said, you need to check with your state homeschool laws, but Jen's right. They are all different.
They are, but most of them are not onerous in really any stretch of the imagination. And even the ones that have more requirements are still very,
and a lot of the ways
doable.
In which they differ isn't so much, like how many science credits do you have to get? It's more like, how do you notify your state that you're going to homeschool, or who do you check in with, or is there some kind of thing you have to submit? Those are the differences. Yes. It's not really so much like, oh, this state requires 3 sciences and that state requires 4 science. It's not really normally that specific.
Some of them do, but yeah, you're right. A lot of the time it's just your notification, or whether you need to do testing, or whether you need to keep a portfolio.
Okay. Let's see. Amy says, this question likely applies to every educational phase, but I feel even more so as high school. Where do I find the peer groups or educational opportunities that may stretch or challenge my child? I.e., in a healthy situation, a child will rise to the challenge of others more than they might respond to their parent or even an online classroom, looking for stretch and growth that might not come from, quote, just being at home.
Yeah, and we want that for our kids anyway, don't we? We want to send them out someplace where other adults are saying the same things that we've been telling them all along. So for validation, then they're like, oh, wow, okay, I guess what the parents were saying is really a thing, because this other person is saying it too. We want that for our kids. And so in my family, one of the things that has been really helpful for us is the local co-op that has the high school classes. We did do CC for a couple of years. That was great. We're not in CC anymore. We're just going to a local co-op where the moms teach the classes, but they're great classes. And so for us, that's been one thing that we've really been enjoying. Now, there's the thing called dual enrollment, and a lot of people like to do that. That's where your kid can go to the community college or any local college, really, take college classes and get high school credit for them, and also college credit for them. And there are pros and cons to that. You have to deal with the logistics, you have to deal with the cost. Now, there are states that have free dual enrollment, and that's amazing. My state doesn't have that, but there are states that do. Although even when it's free, sometimes there's a bit of a fee. So do the research on that. Definitely your kid is in a classroom situation, and being challenged. However, since it is outside of the home, then you're dealing with, possibly situations or content that might not be what you want your kid to experience. So that's something you have to weigh super carefully before you do that. But that's definitely a way to provide that challenge like you're talking about.
Yeah, and I guess it would depend on your own personal area, Amy, and what's available near where you are.
Yeah. Because I think online classes are a great way for that to happen too. But if we're trying to find something beyond online classes, then those are the two things that.
Yeah. So I guess there are a variety of online classes. I mean, and this is true at all ages, not just high school, but there are the online classes where it's more like you log into this website, you watch videos, you click and take a quiz, and it's more like textbook learning in the sense that you're just kind of doing it at your own pace. But then there are other online classes that are more like, we're all live and we're in a forum and we're discussing our ideas with each other, and the professor or teacher is on there, live a certain time of the week or something like that.
And my daughter's taking one of those right now. So I kind of glommed onto that as being an online class. And I forgot, of course, there's the other kind where you're just more working on your own through the content, but it's not a live class. So my daughter's taking geometry live online this year, and that's been good
for
too for that
peer
sort of
interaction or teacher or both, or
not really peer interaction, but definitely teacher, the encouragement, the trying, the keeping moving,
and
accountability
who is she
aspect.
taking that from? Yes.
She's taking Mr. D math, Mr. D geometry.
All right.
Yeah.
So let's see. Oh. Okay. Next question is also from Amy. In other interviews I've heard with you, Anne, you've recommended not looking too far ahead, not stressing out, but are there general milestones to aim for as we progress through middle school? Maybe assurance that we're not way off the mark as high school nears?
That's an interesting question. And I'm excited to think that you've listened to me before, Amy. How cool is that? Let's see. I really don't think that you need to be worried. I just don't. I feel like if you're doing kind of due diligence on a little bit of research in the middle school years and you're trying to work towards the independent learning, I don't see that you need to reach super far ahead. I just don't. As long as you've, like in my book, I do suggest planning out the entire high school career, at least like which courses, not courses, which credits they'll take which year. So, okay, I want them to take math in 9th, 10th, and 11th, and I want them to take science in, 9th and 10th, and I want 10th to be a lab. I do suggest planning that all out before you start 9th grade, but that's still a pretty general plan. It's not okay, this year's going to be American history, and then that next year's going to be ancient history. And it doesn't even have to be that specific. If you do have that general plan in place, though, as you're heading into 9th grade, I think that's sufficient. I don't think you need to reach any farther than that. There's time to reach farther than that. I would say by the end of 10th grade, then maybe you want to start looking at thinking about what standardized tests to take and getting a little bit more specific with, is there a bent that my kid has that might provide us with some possible college majors to be thinking about? And from the college major idea, again, we're very general, then you might start looking at colleges that would have that major, that would be ones to kind of just have on your radar, it doesn't have to be, this year you need to be doing this, and this year you need to be doing that. And I've seen timelines like that, and I've thought about making one for my people, but it feels too rigid, and it feels too much like, that's another thing I have to do.
Or like, oh no, and my kid is already in 5th grade. We've missed the mark, and now we'll never make it to high school properly. Yeah. So this is, I'm thinking about this as you're talking, and, another challenge that we've had with my oldest is that he's dyslexic. And so that's kind of another, factor there in the equation for us. And, and when you were talking about helping them to be independent, and, there are specific challenges when you have somebody who has reading difficulties, but, so, another person who I've privately kind of freaked out to is Marianne Sunderland, who is very wise about dyslexia. And, when I talked to her at one point, it was last fall, and she wisely said, okay, Lynna, it's the fall of 8th grade, and there are a good 10 months between fall and, this fall and next September. And you just have no idea what kind of changes could happen in that time period, and I've seen it happen before with other kids and other phases. And it kind of makes me think about labor, like when you're in labor and you're like, oh, I've been laboring for 12 hours and I'm only 3 centimeters. So at this rate, it's going to take me another and you're doing this math in your head, right? But it doesn't necessarily work out like that. So you could have a child who's made this slow, painstaking progress along the way, and you feel like everything is pulling teeth, and you don't know if they're ever going to be able to put on their own socks without being reminded. And then suddenly they have this thing that they're interested in, or maybe like, what you said, Amy, earlier, like they have this outside class where they're working towards something, and it's not like, well, this child is doing this by fifth grade, and my child still isn't doing it in eighth grade. So I guess it'll be 3 more years before they'll be able to do that. Not necessarily.
No, not at all. Yeah. One of the things that turned me off of looking at public school requirements is when I realized that in the state of Missouri, or maybe it's just my local school district, I don't know, they wanted them to have a career path ready by the end of eighth grade. It's like, this is crazy. My kids aren't going to be able to do this because I know myself and I wouldn't have been able to do that. Just don't put those kind of timelines on yourself. Just don't. Each kid is different. And yeah, there can be kind of some slow and steady, and then all of a sudden there's a jump, or maybe it just stays slow and steady, or maybe, they're doing the best of their ability and it's not as far as you think it should be. And then now there's a bunch of frustration and butting heads, but just go with the flow, and don't let your kid get away with murder. I'm not saying that, but, don't put a timeline per se on yourself.
So good.
Yeah.
Okay. So Arlene says, I want our son to be more independent in teaching himself. How do I keep him focused? Did you ever have to set certain guidelines to make sure that they stay on task?
Oh yeah. This is I'm sorry to say this, but this is kind of a never ending battle. All of my teens have struggled with this in one way or another at one time or another. So, I've got a blog post about this too. We'll have to make a note of this one later, but the Pomodoro method is something that we've used with great effect, where you set a timer for 25 minutes. They work steady for 25 minutes. At the end of 25 minutes, they get a 5-minute break, and they have to get up and move around in some way, shape, or form, go get a snack, go use the restroom, whatever. And then at the end of 5 minutes, they come back and work for 25 more. And if they know they only have to work for 25 minutes and then they get a break, a lot gets done. Also, they're trying to beat the clock. Okay, it would be really nice if I could finish all of these.
Not have to come back
before
again.
that timer goes off, and then I can move on to something else. It's not something that we use every day, all day, but it's been a great help to, remind them of what it means to kind of stay on task and work hard. And so we bring it out again every now and again, and then kind of get back in gear, and then might back off of that a little bit for a while until it looks like it's needed again. Also, just all sorts of motivational things. I will, drop a Hershey Kiss on their paper randomly, or, hey, you got this done really well. And so, let me give you a hug, or let me draw a stupid smiley face on your paper, or let's go out for ice cream. It's just bribery.
Classic parenting.
That's right. But just those are the type of things, though, that make it kind of fun, that show that we are thinking about them, that we're paying attention to whether they're working hard or not working hard. Nagging is also going to come into play. We think it won't, but it will. Setting up contracts. Hey, you know what? Let's agree that you're going to do this, this, and this. And if you don't, bad juju, this will happen. There's all sorts of, you end up learning lots of different techniques and ways to keep them on task. Mostly though, it's just about knowing who they are and what motivates them and what makes them tick, and allowing them to experiment with
so true.
all
Because
of
if they're,
maybe
I was going to say, if they're easily distractible at, 6th grade, that's probably something that they're going to deal with to some extent or another for the rest of their lives. So helping them to develop their own set of tools.
Right. Yes, exactly. What, maybe they want to try laying down on their bed, on their tummy, and reading their book, which would be uncomfortable to me for any length of time, but maybe they would, be able to concentrate better that way for a little while. So let them try it. During the teen years, we didn't do much staying all in the same place. The kids were in their rooms. They were in the dining room. They were in the living room, just wherever they kind of felt most comfortable working at that given time. But when things started becoming undone, or they weren't working well, then that's when the funnel got pulled back in, and okay, now you and I are going to sit here at the table today and we're just going to crank this out. So it's really just the next step, A lot of people think it's going to be something hugely different. No, it's just the next step. You've been doing these things with your kids all along. So
yeah, it's comforting to be reminded, like there's not some magical formula out there that we're missing. It's just the same things we've been doing all along, just keeping along. And that, yeah, that's good. Okay, so we got one more. Amy says, after listening to your interview here with Lynna, I'm encouraged, but what about those test scores, SATs, ACTs?
Well, I got stories to go with that too. My first one, we're in the middle of the country, and I grew up out east where the SATs are a thing. In the middle of the country, the ACTs are more of a thing. I think out west they are too. I'm not positive. And so I didn't know which my kids should take. So I made her take both the SAT and the ACT. And she came back from both of them and said, I absolutely refuse to take the ACT again. I hated that thing. I'm not going to take it again. But she was willing to take the SAT again. So she did that. I don't think her score improved that much, but I wish I'd made her take the ACT again. So all this to say, test scores are a thing. They do weigh heavily for scholarships, which is why I wish I had made her take the ACT a second time, because just a couple more points and she could have gotten thousands more dollars. So all of the kids since then have taken the ACT at least twice. So that's my first thing. Have them plan that they're going to take these tests more than once. Figure out which is the one that's kind of most important for the schools that you're looking at. If you want to have them take both, then fine. For me, it was kind of like also just testing experience. So let's get both kinds and let's do them multiple times. So have them just plan that they will take these tests more than once. Also, I kind of threw my eldest daughter into their cold, because I remembered growing up, you just took the SAT one Saturday. You didn't do anything to get ready for it. You just showed up at school and took it. And that's the way it was. But things were different then, and they're different now. So I now have my kids prepare for them, learning how to take the test, learning what types of problems are on the test, learning tips and tricks. Now, Mr. D has a great, two great courses for math to prepare for the math tests of those sections of those, which I highly recommend as well. But you can do that on your own with, ACT for Dummies or whatever. My daughter, my youngest now, has the opportunity to do that at a co-op class, which is cool. It's an ACT prep class. So prepare for them. But don't worry, your kid will get the score they'll get, and that will give you an indication of what type of colleges you should be searching for them for. This is one thing that really tends to bog people down, is we all, and as homeschoolers, I don't know if this is different for us, but I feel like it is. I feel like we're all like, oh, my kid's going to get my kid should be way up here. My kid should get into the higher level colleges. And I don't think that's necessary to do things that way. I think we need to be realistic about where our kid is going to fit in and where our kid is going to succeed. And so for most of us, I'm an ordinary person. My kids are ordinary. Right, we're not Harvard, Ivy League people. We just aren't. So why do we feel like we have to prepare for that? Why do we think we have to have the scores for that? We don't necessarily. Do the, if you're going to invest time into trying to impress colleges, then taking prep courses and preparing for those tests is the best way to do it. But beyond that, you've done your best. The score that comes back is an indication of where your kid is going to fit in. And don't despair. Just go looking at those, and they'll get a great education, a great college experience if they're where they're comfortable. That's not going to happen.
I think you're right that there's something particular about the homeschool environment, because, I've heard moms say, and this is especially true if like you're getting some flack from family about homeschooling or something like that. I've heard moms say, well, the proof is in the pudding. And it's like, well, maybe, I mean, or maybe your kid will be average, just like he would have been if he was in public school. You're educating the same child, just differently, but that doesn't, it doesn't guarantee that he's going to turn out like brilliant just because he was homeschooled. Or like when people are saying like, oh, I don't know, should I homeschool? And then you'll you like, I'm thinking in Facebook groups or whatever, and then you'll hear someone say, well, homeschoolers routinely get higher test scores, da, da, da. And it's like, yeah, that's a statistic, and I'm sure it's accurate, but that doesn't mean that your particular child will suddenly, become more brilliant because he's in the homeschool. And I'm with you. Like, I have delightfully ordinary children. They're wonderful and I love them. But even as their mommy, I don't think that they are geniuses. I mean, they have many wonderful gifts, and I'm thankful for who the Lord made them to be. But I've kind of had to come to grips with, like, there's not going to be this moment where, the whole world goes, wow, you were right to homeschool. Your children turned out amazing, just like that's not really where my validation comes from.
No, exactly. Exactly. Sometimes we get it, but usually not. Usually our kids just kind of join, the adult ranks, and they're productive members of society, just like a lot of other people are. And, but we know what we've done. We know what we've put into them. We know who they are as a result, and therein lies our satisfaction. So test scores, do the best you can, but don't stress about them.
Yeah. And not something to like crush relationships over.
Oh, right. Yeah,
yes.
Definitely.
Okay. Well, Anne, thank you so much. I'm sure I'm seeing comments that are rolling by here. As you've been saying things about, Amy said, thanks for meeting people where they're at in fear and misconceptions and guiding us through. Arlene says she's paying close attention. So yes, lots of comments that people are being encouraged and reminded of good stuff here. So thank you so much for joining us this evening. And like I said, it's been good fun. So if you would like to learn more about Anne and her site, Annie and Everything, and especially the homeschooling high school content, there's that green button there. And then I will be looking forward to seeing you back next week. And we are actually going to talk about homeschooling through depression next week. So probably not as much fun and games, but hopefully encouraging and helpful to anybody who's been through that or is struggling through that now. So, all right. Thank you all for joining us, and I'll see you next week.